Poetic peeps and gentle persons, in-betweeners and non-conformers, genders all and genders equal. Welcome to Eat the Storms, the poetry podcast. My name is Damien B. Donnelly. I get to be your host and producer. This is episode 14. We are currently bursting at the seams with poetic talents this season. This is season 8 of the podcast and we're already coming towards the end of it. I believe we have 4 episodes left, but you never know. I might find a way to squeeze in a 5th extra episode. All of this available on platforms like Spotify, Apple, Google, Breaker, Podbean, Kelleher FM, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castbox, Podcast Addicts and iTunes, and you never know, possibly 1 or 2 platforms that I have yet to discover myself. All thanks to Spotify for podcasters, which makes life and producing a podcast very easy. We were back for a week. We were off. Well, I say we were off, but in fact, it was my launch week. It was the launch of my second poetry collection, Back From Away, which has just been published by Tourist Press, headed by the magnificent Liz McSkeen, and we had our launch at the Irish Writers' Centre on Wednesday, the 8th of May. It was myself and fellow Tourist Press poet Emma McCarvey, based in the north on the Ards Peninsula, who launched her second collection, Highland Boundary Fault. And just a little plug, they're both currently available to buy on the Tourist Press website. Now, today, we are back and we are taking journeys all over the world. We are diving into the sea, the sky, its islands and birds in Scotland. We are taking train rides from Kiev to Chelm. We're having a stopover in Malaysia, learning to stop, breathe and wreathe from a marathon runner, now poetic champion. And if that wasn't enough, I am about to be joined by 2 esteemed prize-winning poets for our Behind the Storms chat today. Not only are we going to talk about how they originally got into poetry, what excites them about writing, we're also going to talk about the Fingal Poetry Festival, one of Ireland's most esteemed annual festivals that kicks off in September this year. So that's all to come here on Eat the Storms, a poetry podcast. So why don't you settle down, grab the biscuits, the Battenberg, some Tom Puss, or perhaps some candy floss, a gin and tonic, or perhaps just a cosy cup of tea. My name is Damien B. Donnelly. This is Eat the Storms, and I hope you enjoy the show. And for my first guest on the podcast today, I'm delighted to welcome a returning guest to Eat the Storms, who joined us originally as one of the contributors to the Storms Journal issue 2, and is now back to share poems from her latest poetry pamphlet, Poet, Seabird, Island, just published by Boats Against the Current. She lives on the east coast of Scotland, has 5 chapbooks, including the aforementioned Poet, Seabird, Island, Medusa, Retold, and Precious Metal. She's had work this year appearing in Propel magazine and Dirigible Balloon, and is currently working on a book about light sources. I was lucky enough to read her chapbook prior to its release to write a blurb, and it really is an extraordinary piece. These are poems that are seasonal, that leave you with hope or not, with the sea sobbing in your heart. Love poems to the curve of the earth seen from the cormorant, the current, the call to adventure, and the loss endured on the fight to flight. So sit back and relax for this exceptionally fine flight. Poet, Seabird, Island, by Sarah Wallis.
Alice in the Sea. The seals are singing loud tonight, a hymn of old, as they throw and catch between them in the bubbled surf, the wild and breathing sapphire of the sea. I listened to them bark and laugh, but I did not catch the joke at first, until I joined them in that surf and gasped with cold, bounced high and tall 1 minute, and then on sand that disappeared beneath my feet, made me small again. And one seal flippered past so fast he took my breath. Another came up curious to look me in the face, then sidled by. A astounded to be so close, with those so happy to simply be themselves and sing aloud. In agreement with the seals, I too laughed and laughed, when once again, happy beached and safe from sapphire surf, to find myself on my own two legs at last. The City and the Sea. The history of my family is not to make waves, nor sail them, until my mother from the Celts rose to challenge, a fierce feminist warrior with sparkling green eyes, a shield, a legacy, Pankhurst, Shelley, Wollstonecraft. I come from small flats with large rooms, tall ceilings, London-bound, but the Welsh coast calling. Contradictions always, the city and the sea. Male choirs singing Land of Our Fathers, Bread of Heaven, Abide with Me. I come from tragedy, a missing heartbeat, the sound filled up with mackerel house cats, a gargantuan shell collection, housed in glass cabinets, the sea sobbing in your ear. Fish cakes. The long, long line of long faces, seated at their school lunch for an hour, an eternity back then. The black plastic stools securely attached to the bench, the chrome bits and bobs shining and merciless on the children's poor choices as they played with their fish food. It was my first day in a new school, uniform scratchy bottle green instead of smooth worn grey, and fish cakes to deal with for lunch. One kind hand appeared, reaching for mine, the headmistress on watch for the new kid's first day. Would you prefer something else? The dropped jaws fell into air like fish gasps, followed us along the line. Jealous faces turned like clocks to watch as we walked hand in hand, and she even carried my untouched tray. The faces followed as a spotlight on stage follows the star, and something like fame approached, my first day. Out amongst the plunge divers. Mad weather, stinging rain and squall. The gannets are out, plunge diving the plenty. Flash of white back and black tip wings, like one of Degas' ballerinas, all in pirouette. They skim and back dive the water with angel's grace, till sword faces first they break through the surface, devil-faced for chick feed with an ice-driven focus, arrowing to target and fish gulp. White horses splash, the feathered folk dive. God and the weather, you know you're alive. Prizes sought and won, they're back to spiralling, a float of angel's ink, shadow-tipped for home, as we all are, dipped in the water and thinking of home. Paddling on the shores of the wild world. Oh, I have paddled by the shores of Ailsa Craig and listened to the cliff-struck wails of 1,000 mighty seabirds climbing air, been awestruck by the majesty of wayward swirling grey-black storm clouds and the silent towering rock stacks gathered there, unbowed in hanging mists, bestowed undaunted, so many churchmen in their solemnity, their dragging darks, awaiting judgment all, and in a gust of storm finally it is given. O valiant angels, fall with trespasses attached, rock and chick and bird nest, the storm-forced fleeing fledge, fled to float the life pelagic, so back to sea they paddle, fierce braves, innate knowing leads the way. Do they also know they'll be led back to this same cliff to breathe themselves one day? Iona in Lacrimis. The saints are crying in the wind. Can't you hear them? Only the cries of the wing-born sing out. Oystercatcher, skylark, plover and corncrake. This too may be an answer. The saints are letting their tears fall, a gentle cascade of green marble. Don't you hear them clatter together? Only the sound of the surf in the shingle and the grey stones clinging to the beach in the rising tide. This too may be an answer. Iona greenstone shaped by wind and wave and left on the beach for our sin's green greed, collect such charms and be saved from fire and fear and shipwreck. Islands of safe purchase, may the marble and jade and nephrite shed tears of the island go well with you. St. Columba's bright blessings fall on the beach, day and night, but slowing through the island's deep well of time. Where once were thousands. In a cathedral of sea and sky, the island beguiles and inspires. Sometimes the isolation terrifies us, where all there is to do is confront yourself, your thoughts and the weather. The veil is thin. A silent raft of white feathers in the water, an angel mirage floating past these shores. They will not strand here today, but further on. The mighty gannets, brought low and all dead. They should be plunge-diving, gold-headed arrows glinting in the sun, bringing fish to feed their young, but instead are mown down by an invisible enemy come into paradise. The ancestors have seen die-offs before, and speak soothing traditions, spinning stories by the fireside, surrounded by ancient bothy stones, humming with bees and life. They and the waves will tell you this struggle is all there has ever been on an island, and to survive it, this trick, this is enough.
And for our next guest, we are leaving Scotland and heading all the way to Malaysia for another returning guest to Eat the Storms. And please remember that once you are a first-time guest on the Storms, you are always a welcomed returning guest. Now, this is a mixed-race poet and a writer who has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize by Dreamcatcher magazine, Stairwell Books, in 2022. He has been published in places like the American Journal of Poetry, Beltway Poetry Quarterly, New Verse, among others, and of course he was also with us for our inaugural issue of the Storms Journal. I am delighted today to welcome back to Eat the Storms the poetic musings of Julian Matthews.
In the usual optimistic way, with a poem called Death Wish. I hope When I go, the morticians avoid giving me a makeover. Frankly, I would object to the fakery. I don't want to be gussied up with lipstick or powder. Let my cheeks remain sunken, wrinkles showing forehead, stay crease. Let those who want to peek in see me for who I am. Authentic and without selfie-ready cosmetics. I'm resigned to the way I look. My rough-hewn, scrunched-up face is a rock climber's nightmare. My nose is a love child between a cauliflower and a ginger root, past their sell-by dates. My crooked teeth are a pile-up of white and not so white Fiats on the federal highway. Leave me open-mouthed for the morbid drive-by mourners to gasp, unable to resist whispering to each other indignantly. They should have shut it. Certainly not. Even in that, I want my pouty, petulant pie hole wide open just in case I choose to get up and read a poem at my own funeral, or object to the gushing, over-complimentary ChatGPT assisted eulogies, or just to leave a loud sigh or sarcastic snort or yell, aha! So that's what you look like, God. At the end, it might lift a few spirits. Also, leave my eyes wide open so I can check myself in the mirror on the way to heaven. I want to be seen as woke when I question St. Peter over his cock crowing denials. Unfriend. I can't unfriend a dead friend on Facebook. I can't delete the number on my phone either. What am I expecting? A phone call? A text message? Heaven really needs to expand its cell phone coverage. Hell only makes collect calls. I never pick up those. I know it's just a spammer trying to sell me something I don't need. They must have a lot of free upgrade plans down there. Their marketing teams are killers. Friendship online can be a tenuous thing. Is a friend on social media a real friend or just a means to an end, like a creeper on a wall clinging to a boundary or a border between two countries without immigration checks or customs clearance? I have too much baggage anyway. Always need to unload. I grieve at birthday reminders. I reread your last posts, your last messages. You're a haunted house with broken windows. I peek in to see your ghost. Come out and play, I say. You laugh, smile, then walk away. Not my time already? But why did yours come so early? It's like you took an elevator up and pressed the top button. You should have gotten off earlier. You missed my floor. I'm still here. And all the elevators are broken. They only go down now. I take the staircase sometimes just to hear the echo of you. I could use a hug tonight. You give lots of those up there? Do you receive any from the angels? I never ever saw God as the huggable kind, just an old guy with a long beard with a mean streak, put us all on one planet and left us here. Go forth and multiply? We overdid it, I think. How do you embrace 8 billion people? Even 1,000 friends online is too much. One hug truly given is all I need tonight. But ghosts and gods don't hug, do they? Invisibly is too high a wall to cross for now. It's a boundary you can't see, but always there. A border on a map made up of broken lines. This border between us is made up of broken hearts. I'm just glad there's no unfriend button on your end, because I'm never going to unfriend you on mine.
Today, for our Behind the Storms chat, I am delighted to welcome two of the committee members of the Fingal Poetry Festival and two fantastic poets in their own right. Enda Coyle-Greene from Dublin, who now lives in Skerries where the festival is held, and Ceaití Bheildiúin, who grew up in Rush here in Dublin but now lives on the Dingle Peninsula. Today, not only are we going to talk about poetry and its beginnings, how we fell in love with it, but we're also going to talk about the beginning of the festival itself, which has had various guises and names over the years. Originally arising from poetry at the mills, at the Skerries Mills. And then in 2020, it became the Fingal Poetry Festival, with the iconic Skerries Mills still at its centre, but branching out into other locations around this beautiful harbour town. The festival itself will kick off this year on the 6th of September, running until the 14th, but part of the festival has already begun. A few weeks ago on the podcast, we had Sheila Ryder, an acclaimed spoken word artist, with us, and she has already started the Fingal Poetry Slam regional heats. Soon they will take place in libraries around the county, including Malahide, Blanchardstown and Swords, and the Balbriggan Slam happened just last month. And of course, there is also the acclaimed Fingal Poetry Competition, which now has two separate prizes, one for poems in English and one for poems os Gaeilge. So keep your eyes and ears open for those opening dates. Enda and Ceaití, thank you so much for joining me today. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you both.
Great to be here.
Great to be here, Damien.
Listen, before we talk about your own poetry and how you fell in love with poetry originally, perhaps you can give us a little bit of rundown about how the Fingal Poetry Festival found its feet and how it's developed to become this incredibly popular and vital and diverse festival.
Right, I suppose I should speak about that, as I was one of the people who was in at its birth. I was involved for years running the spoken word poetry event at Soundwaves Festival, which ran very successfully out of Skerries, I think for about 10 years. At that, we had various readers, we tried out different formats, and we always had a huge crowd. It always went over very well. And then finally, when the Soundwaves Festival finished, Ernestine, who is our chair, Ernestine Vosger, and I just decided we'll run a one-off event at the Mills. And for that we had, I'm trying to think who we had first, we had Pat Boran and Mary Branley, who was a wonderful poet and singer-songwriter from Sligo. And of course, Pat is a very well-known poet and publisher. And it was a huge success. We had a huge crowd, wonderful evening. So buoyed by that, we said the next year, let's do this again. And we invited Paula Meehan and Iggy McGovern. And again, that was a wonderful event. And then again, the next afternoon over coffee and cake, which is how things always start with Ernestine, coffee and cake, I said, oh, wouldn't it be lovely to run a poetry festival? And Ernestine, just apropos nothing. And Ernestine said, well, why don't we? I mean, it was like a movie, we put on the show ourselves in the barn. And so we got on, the first thing we did was we got on to Fingal County Council Arts Office, Rory O'Byrne, he was the arts officer, he's since retired. Sarah O'Neill is now there, she's wonderful. And Rory came out to the Mills to meet us. And that was it. It just got bigger and bigger. The committee has grown. We've gone every year from strength to strength. Now, the first year was tricky, because of course the pandemic arrived.
Yep.
Which meant we had to, like everyone else, we were locked down and we were faced with a decision, what do we do here? So we decided we'd go ahead and we would film everything, which we did. And I think the films are still up on our website, I hope they are anyway. I asked, again in one of those, let's put the show on ourselves moments, to ask a relative for a phone number of somebody who was involved in the film business. And we got a wonderful Sean Leonard, another Fingal resident, a native from Rush, who filmed various wonderful poets, Mary O'Donnell, Theo Dorgan, Susan Connolly. There were Jean O'Brien, loads of them in the Mills and over in Sutton. And that went very well, apart from at the very end, we had to do everything outdoors. I mean, the challenges involved were unreal. We had to do every event outdoors, and every event went wonderfully until the very last one when the heavens opened. And I think Peter Sir was reading, and he got a round of applause when he got back up onto the stage after the deluge. And we just kept going. So we're here now, we're in our 5th year now.
It's absolutely incredible. But you started off with, you already started off with such fantastic names. Like you said, you had Pat Bourne, you had Paula Meehan. Was it easy to attract people at the beginning, or were people sort of questioning you what's going on, or did it just go from strength to strength?
I suppose in a way the people I asked were very generous.
Yeah.
And thought it was a great idea. And I'm always surprised if I ask any poet to read and they say yes. I always think this is great. We have this person. And it doesn't matter at what stage of it. I don't want to use the word career because I don't believe poets have careers. They have a life, And when they say yes, I'm always really pleased, no matter who they are. But yes, I was delighted when these people said yes. And I asked. And I mean, all you can do is ask, Dave.
Exactly. That's the important thing. Sometimes you just have to stick your neck out and say, listen, will you take part? And it's amazing. I think especially the literature community in Ireland, it's such a strong community. Yes. And it does want to take part and it does want to support. And what you've done is what you did was create a new platform, which is now a renowned platform and an acclaimed platform. So huge congratulations on that.
Well, I just felt that the Fingal, North County Dublin, which I love, every inch of it, needed something like that.
Yeah.
As I said, like last year we had Elaine Ní Cuileanán, we had Harry Clifton, Katrina Ní Clerkeen. These are just some of the names. And I'm just delighted when these people say yes and come to and read for us. And other years we've kind of gone outside the town a little bit too. It's a lot of work, but it's very, very rewarding.
Yeah. And Kathy, then when you came in, was there already an Irish element to it? Were there already Irish speaking poets involved, or was that part of was that how you arrived?
I suppose I discovered the festival online in its first year and the COVID days. And I was fascinated by the fact that it was in Skerries next door to my hometown, Rush, where I suppose it was so exciting for me. I was the video work on it, the music, the poetry, it was all class. I soon enough found myself in touch with the committee and on it. And I suppose it was, having grown up in Rush with next to no Irish, and knowing there were now Irish speakers and Gaelscoileanna in the Rush and Skerries area. And I thought, why not? Why can't we not try and have that reflected in the festival? And so I've spent 20 years now living in the Kerry Gaeltacht, and I loved the idea of bringing some of that experience to the festival, the Irish language, and to find all the speakers there, that there was a community of speakers there. And while Irish language poets were not yet reading at the festival, Enda mentioned Elaine Ní Cuileanán and Peter Sir. They're just two of the poets who speak Irish, although they write in English. Mm-hmm. They are bilingual in that sense.
And Kathy, was it, you mentioned growing up, there wasn't a sort of a sense of the Irish language. Did you already write in Irish when you were still living here, or did it take sort of that move down to Kerry, down to the peninsula?
Oh no, it was I wasn't really writing until 20 years ago when I lived, not truly, I suppose. It started with Irish words. In fact, my interest in language, I think, was partially woken up by the fact that there were old Irish words in the language of my childhood. Mm-hmm. I was fascinated by words like shingans, and it got proud of a dog, which a dog is a thorn, but it comes from the word jalag in Irish. The L becomes silenced and it's a dog. So and the shingan in Irish, shangan would be the Irish in some communities in the Gaeltachts. So that was part of it, and my mother, I suppose, as a blow into Rush, she had picked up on those words and sort of almost deliberately gave them to us in their dying day. It was a link back to Irish when I discovered that those words were Irish.
And maybe just for our listeners, just to let us know. So, am I right in saying that each area of Ireland, each Gaeltacht, has its own dialect in terms of Irish?
It does, but I wouldn't make too much of that. It's the huge overlap of Irish that's in each of them that makes it the one language. And so, yes, they're the same as in Cork and in Dublin. Ukrainians now that I work with here, they find, having learned Irish or English in Kerry, trying to understand a Cork speaker or a Dublin speaker is almost impossible, or a Northern Irish speaker or a London speaker. So, it's similar. They would have their own dialect as well as accents, yes.
Okay, and it's interesting. So you mentioned like the overlaps there, and I mentioned already in the introduction that the Fingal Poetry Festival this year, you've already started the regional slams, and you will have the poetry competition, which will open later on this year before the festival actually kicks off. Maybe do you want to tell us a little bit about what's coming up in the festival this year?
Well, we're starting, as you mentioned it, we have the slam, the Grand Slam, the Fingal Slam, which takes place regionally around the libraries around Fingal, and that culminates in the Grand Slam, the final, on the first night of the festival in September 13th. We have the Fingal Poetry Prize, which is for poems in English, and that opens for entries on the 1st of May and closes on the 30th of June. And we have An Fiach, which is for poems written in the Irish language, and that has the same opening and closing dates. So we have 3 prizes, and they're the first things. And then the festival will kick off itself. I think we're having am I right, Kathy, a poetry party in the Mills on the 6th of September. And that will be a week in advance of the festival weekend proper, which is the 13th to the 15th. And then the 13th to the 15th, we have the slam on the Friday night, and then all day, the big poetry day out on the Saturday. I mean, Skerries has been traditionally a place where Dubliners came on the train, chips on the beach and a ramble around the harbour or whatever. So we kind of go with that because it suits poetry and music, a relaxed atmosphere. And it's very relaxed, even though we will have some very, very well-known guests, readers. Our programme will be announced later in the year. And Sunday morning, we're finishing up with another lovely event as well. So that's the outline for the festival.
So you take over Skerries a little bit this year. So it's not just happening in the Mills, it's happening in various events and locations around the area.
Absolutely. I mean, in previous years, we've gone as far as Balbriggan. Wow. And we do move outside the town a little bit, and we have plans maybe in that direction for later. But I think the general idea is that the heart of the festival takes place around the town of Skerries, and which, not wishing to advertise it too much, has plenty of coffee shops and bars and lovely beach,
It is. It's a beautiful coastal town, and it is extraordinary because I suppose we're so used to living here, and I'm a bit of a blow-in. I'm in Lusk, which is not too far away, but one of the features of this area was that it was a holiday town. These were holiday locations, especially from people on the south side of the city would come over and stay.
We used to come all the way over from the other side in our car every year with a cat. Scary. I did that throughout my childhood, and the irony is that I'm now living here. But I love, as I said to you earlier, Damien, I love every inch of North County Dublin.
Yeah.
I just think it's a very special area, and it has something very unique about it.
Yeah. Well, listen, Enda, you mentioned childhood there. So part of the reason that I'm doing interviews this season on the podcast is to ask guests about beginnings, how they first fell in love with poetry. Just before I ask you the actual question, I'll let you answer, just to let our audience know. So your debut collection, Snow Negatives, won the Patrick Kavanagh Award in 2006 and then was published by Daedalus Press a year later. You followed that up with A Map of the Last in 2013, and then Indigo Electric Baby in 2020, also from Daedalus. You've been published in a wide range of anthologies, both in Ireland and abroad. Won the Catherine and Patrick Kavanagh Fellowship in 2022, and you have an MA from the Seamus Heaney Centre for Poetry from Queen's University in Belfast. So how did it all begin? How did you fall in love with poetry in the first place?
Well, gosh, it goes back a long way. It goes back to school in Rathfarnham. And Kathy was saying about the sound of language. My Irish, unfortunately, is school Irish, like a lot of people. But language, Irish language, language is important to a poet.
Yeah.
Poetry is much about the sound of words, the feeling of them in your mouth, in your head, as how it goes on the page. And I remember poems like Misha Rafferty and Phila in school, and Greasy Joan doth keel the pot, icicles, all of that. And I remember being mesmerized by that as a very small child, like I'm talking 6, 7 in school. And the poetry was always the first thing I turned to from primary school in the books. And I actually started writing poetry when I was very young. And I remember I had poems published in Junior Press and Evening Press, which is a paper that's closed a long time. And just the thrill of seeing your name when you're little and poem. But I never thought this is anything extraordinary. I just thought, will I write poems? It was, I suppose I came from a family that's very musical. My mother was a singer and a music teacher, and I'm obsessed with music, always have been. And I think I always call them first cousins. So I suppose the obsession with music and the obsession with poetry kind of grew up together. I wrote and wrote and wrote, and eventually I never even thought about sending work out until a certain point. And then suddenly it dawned on me that that's what poets do. That's what writers do. They send out work. So I started doing that. And I suppose I always took it seriously, writing, without really taking it seriously. I just wanted every poem to be as good as I could make it. And I'm still doing
it. Well, your first collection won the Patrick Kavanagh Award. So clearly you were doing something right to begin with.
What a shock, Damien. I must have been in the room when I got the phone call from Inishkeen. I was in work, and I worked in a business completely unrelated to poetry. And I got the phone call, and I nearly collapsed with a shock. I mean, I never entered this thinking I was going to win it, but I did. So, and it was great.
Was it a challenge? Is that a challenge then afterwards when you're thinking, what shall I do next? And you're thinking, well, the first one won the Patrick Kavanagh Award.
That's a very good question. And they call that in music the difficult second album. Well, they use, but you see, in my case, I started my MA in Queen's on the very day Pat Boring gave me the first copy of the first book. I mean, you couldn't make this up at all the same day. So I was into something else. I was into the masters. It was something I'd wanted to do forever.
Mm-hmm.
Very mature student doing it, which I think was probably better for me anyway. So I was immediately into that, which kept my mind away from how are you going to do this? Follow that one up. And it led me into how can I make more poems that will, be better maybe. So that took me 2 years, and then I took quite a bit, maybe another year, editing the whole thing. So I was into the second book, Map of the Last, and I got over that hump that way.
Fantastic. Well, listen, Kathy, I have the same question for you. How did you fall in love with poetry in the first place? And again, just to let our listeners know, so you are a poet, a filmmaker, a visual artist. As I said, you were born here in Rush, close to Skerries in County Dublin, but you now live on the Dingle Peninsula, immersing yourself not only in poetry but also in the Irish language, as we've heard. You are the author of 4 collections, the latest of which is Ógalíf sa Kyo, published by Cuscane, and you were the winner of numerous awards, including the Oireachtas Award and the Forras na Gaeilge. Did the move to Dingle kickstart it all?
Oh, it was huge for it. I suppose I didn't get into poetry properly until then. And even then, it took me years to realize that I was a writer and that poetry was actually my thing. Like words, I was always fascinated by words and loved new words. I remember I was never a reader. I wasn't, and I didn't consider myself to be a writer at all. I wrote my first poem when I was 12. I think I was in first year at second level, and I just finished some sort of a test in English, and I was quite early finishing, and so the resourceful teacher decided that she would challenge me to writing a poem while I was waiting. And I wasn't given a subject or anything. I just didn't know. But somehow I came up with a little poem. And I remember the first lines of it, which were, "Behind the bars I sit and stare and look at trees so very bare." And it's now looking back at it as a child sitting in a classroom that I somehow came up with bars as that I must have felt quite trapped there. But it was later, it was realizing that I could try to encapsulate feelings in words and that I could express myself. My other early writing did begin very often at school, and it was usually secretive, and it was under the copybooks, under the maths copybooks or the history. I was working away on something, and I think I was very driven by experiences, trying to express things that were happening in my life that I couldn't really speak about, that I didn't really know. It wasn't that they were very dark experiences, I must say, but they were experiences that I didn't know how to talk to people about. We weren't raised to express, to discuss anything from home with anybody. So I think that did, really motivate me in a lot of my early writing. And then in lighter moments, I was at home. I was trying to write little comedy shows. I wasn't actually writing. I was composing them in my head, or as I was walking up and down the glass houses in my work. And I was, putting together these little things that I would do as shows for my two at least of my patient sisters, and would listen to me up in our bedroom. So it was, and then it became songs. And one of my sisters, she does remind me about it, how I used to summon her to do backing vocals for me, like in these tuneless little things, like at home. So they were my beginnings. Then I did attend, I was drawn back into writing at several different points along the way. Like I attended a wonderful workshop, I remember, in the Irish Writers' Centre, which was with Oscar McLennan and Anne Seagraves. And it was called Writing for Performance. And I did not have 2 feet on the ground while I was in there. I just loved it all. I really did. It was, and then, I did try to write drama, and I thought I was involved in film. I attended a screenwriting course. I attended a drama writing, a playwriting course. But somehow things didn't come together. I did write short little pieces, but it was when I got to Dingle and I was writing in Irish that I found that actually I'm expressing all those ideas I had that I was trying to put into poetry and plays, trying to put into plays and film, that actually I could encapsulate them much easier in little poems, little parts of them at a time. And so that's, and I do think that it was I was writing in a language that I could barely understand. And so there was it kept it all a little bit mystical for myself. And so that sort of gave me a freedom that I couldn't seem to achieve at other times. So I suppose it was basically I was keeping a diary in Irish when I started to try and submerge myself in Irish in the Gaeltacht. And then what do we have but poetry workshops run by Nuala Nigona, a whole series. So, I mean, this was like, it was like candy floss for me. That I was accepted into it, that I was allowed, that my Irish was okay enough to be part of it was brilliant for me. And then we did it. There were other workshops in the area, occasional ones with Louis Dupuer, Brídni Voron and different people. So it was a baptism, and suddenly I was growing into a poet.
But it's incredible to hear how it became a language that sort of turned everything from just writing to then poetry. And what's interesting for me as I was thinking about that is that, poetry very often is about chiseling back a whole to become the core, to find the core inside. You're cutting out the words that are not needed. You're to just be so specific. And when you start with, like, I've lived in Paris and Amsterdam, so I speak Dutch, I speak French. And when I've started writing in those languages, very often I started writing in poetry because poetry is about its limitations and it's chiseling down. And when you start learning a new language, you were already at that point because you don't have enough vocabulary. So it is limited in terms of what you can write.
You're very resourceful then you have to draw on what you do know and what is there. And you go searching for words in a way that a native speaker mightn't feel the need to.
Well, listen, I hope that there's no breakdowns this year. I hope that everything goes smoothly. I'm saying I hope because it's also my first time being a committee member. So thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to be a part of it.
Thank you, Damien. It's been lovely to talk to you. And we look forward to having you at the festival this year.
Well, listen, have a lovely day. Thank you for joining us and good luck. Everything kicks off, as Enda said, on the 6th, and then the main festival kicks off from the 13th onwards and for the whole weekend. So best wishes, and we'll speak to you all soon. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you, Damien. Bye.
And now from the Fingal Poetry Festival in Skerries on the north coast of Dublin, we are heading all the way down the coast of Ireland, down to Wexford, to an ultra marathon runner who represented the Republic of Ireland in the World Mountain Running Championships in 2022. He has a degree and a master's in business and just completed a course via Oxford University, but today he's here to share poems from his debut poetry collection just published last year called Stop, Breathe, Wreathe, now available on Amazon and Kindle. And last year in August, it ranked number 1 on the Amazon Love Poems chart and number 3 on the British and Irish Poetry chart. So joining us for the first time to share poems from that debut collection, Stop, Breathe, Wreathe, this is David Kelleher.
Hi Damien, thank you for that introduction and thank you for agreeing to have me on your show. I'm going to start off with a poem called Good Man. What good is one good man, standing up to ideologies, belligerently voicing aversions on the deaf ears of societal inequalities? What we are doing is wrong. No poster, no words, no broadcasts should blind us to this truth. Our idleness or actions are engineering hurt and pain. These wars are unnaturally barbaric, unquestionably dark and inhumane. What we're doing is wrong, abstaining to the trauma and the terror bestowed onto the hopelessly innocent, the oppressed, who believe their liberty is a debtor. What good can one man do? Bear arms and choose to fight? No, one man would be slain. Rather be kind to yourself and to others. Hope that the oppressed can see these dark days safely through, and be thankful that the war was impressed onto them and not to me and you. This next poem is called My Cosmos. A star is born within clouds of dust, scattered throughout our galaxy. Turbulences deep within these clouds give rise to knots with sufficient masses that collapse through dust and gases. We are all pieces of dust, pieced together by atoms, formed inside of stars. Our very existence is formed by friction, resultant of a supernova and neutron star collisions. A star twinkles when it enters an atmosphere. It's affected by winds, different temperatures and densities, all of which act with similar explainable propensity. I can tell you all about the stars, my child, their formation, birth, life, and inevitable demise. I can tell you all about the universe, and we can playfully wonder over its length and breadth and size. What I can't tell you, my child, is how best to live your life. I will always be that beacon in the rough seas and calm tides. Remember, you are beautiful, unique, and kind, and that Daddy will always see the cosmos in your eyes. This next poem is called Share. Be strong, be resilient, be brave. Dark days will continue to follow you. They will challenge you relentlessly in many unfamiliar ways. More often it will hurt. Such things cannot be discarded, substituted, or deferred. Life observes and considers no consequences to suffering incurred. A projected character exhaustively played to a disengaged audience that can't quite remember the theme and the reason they paid. Be calm. My presence is not to be entertained. I'm not here to be amused, deceived, or misled. I'm here because I love and want to support you. It's incredibly important that you share with me the thoughts going on in your head. I could take those dark thoughts away, burden them onto my own, put them firmly upon my shoulders, and smile, proudly knowing that you are happy, safe, and that you consider me your solace, your home. This next poem is called A Man. When will I become a man? Is it when I become strong? Should I carry myself with gravitas? When will I become a man? Is it when I acquire wealth? Is it when I am self-affirmed, assertive and ready for battles with enemies earned? No, my child, these are not the characteristics of a man. Rather, old boys, spoilt in pursuit of some erroneous schoolyard plans. Rather, be kind to yourself, be gentle with others, patiently listen to what needs to be heard, support, smile, and bear as burdens unfold. A man's values are deeply rooted, settled firmly into unshakable ground. A man knows his values cannot be acquired, accepts he has punched his ticket, and that there is no second time round. A man knows to laugh, dance, and cry, accept it's okay to be vulnerable, and to share his own burdening thoughts every once in a while. This next poem is called Maybe. What is God? Is it a stoic entity, a superior being always reverently overseen? Maybe it's a story, a promise, an excuse, or a crutch, a reflection, a belief, a shadow that is never meant to be seen, smelt, or touched. Maybe God is an idea, an illusion, a pipe dream, a delusive concept, offering forgiveness to troubled souls that now realize the real cost of time spent pursuing exclusively trivial things like fame, land, or gold. Maybe God is a patron, offering currency and access in exchange for allegiance, awarding gratuities not made of copper, nickel, zinc, or stone, rather ingredients that when baked together produce an increase in oxytocin and serotonin. Maybe God is a patron, gifting homage and purse for those that know a life lived in the pursuit of kindness is the only magic and mystique that once unwrapped, our gods are willing to show. This next poem is called Moments. Presence lapse, reflections, shadows of ghosts and phantoms, projected memories of best times past. Oh, I wish I could rest, sit a while, smile, breathe, hold your hand and make this moment last. You are inspired and pondering, curiously looking to the stars, forever absorbed to fascinating things, playfully debunking life's mysteries, thrills, magic and illusions. You see the world with wide open eyes, your pupils dilated, feasting on enigmas, forever unearthing meaningful questions, looking for answers, interpretations, and exposing suggestions. My world is smaller. Stars are only stars. Breathe, smile, I love you. This phantom moment is fading fast. It's not forever ours. Hold me, my ghost, smile. Let's make this rerun last. This next poem is called What If? Devouring eyes, haze to greed, derailed to possibilities, maybes, what ifs, chance impressions becoming expectancies. Prepare to surrender a life lived of peace to an unsolicited tender. Let this moment pass. It is not to service, only to serve a fallible sage. See it for what it is, a deceitful prompt received by half-wits, favoured occurrences welcomed by practising nihilists. Our reason to pursue the welcome words of the appeasing sophist, the clever allure to catalyst pursuit, the forever friend, directing emotions with promises of false absolutions. Stop, breed, read. Wise words read are only words. Virtues, once understood, will convert the cynical nihilist and expose the motivated sophist. Remember, truth lived is chance reasons, forever deferred. I'd just like to close with this one. This is called An act of desperation, executed in sadness, anger, and unexpected delight. The release, the letting go of exhausted ideals. Be steadfast, be quiet, breathe. In darkness, the damned are forever struggling towards the light. Be patient. Unconsidered acts result in unconsidered outcomes. A journey whilst yours alone is not a venture that should be pursued in purposeful isolation. Never alone, never on your own. Without options, your absence of a choice. Where darkness steals you of your sight, listen out for voices. Let yourself be guided by their tone. Are you okay? Will be that voice that draws you out, holds your hand, and brings you safely home.
And now, from taking time out to catch a breath to heading back out onto the tracks, the train tracks this time, as we are about to make another journey. This time with another returning guest to Eat the Storms, who joined us last year to share poems from his debut poetry collection, Poetic License in a Time of Corona, which came out in May 2022 and was published by 21st Century Renaissance. After almost 40 years working in the medical practice, he is now retired and focusing on poetry and short stories. Today, taking us on that train journey from Kiev to Chelm, this is Chris Fitzpatrick.
On the train from Kiev to Chelm, 28th of October 2023. Pounding rhythm, my pulse is an iron hammer. I'm standing in the short corridor between train carriages. The metal plates grind and shudder and clank beneath my feet. I check my phone. 4 a.m. Soon, the border and Poland. Outside the window is a black smear. The occasional lights are like comets with long, streaking tails. These are the bloodlands of World War II. Bloodshed and death have returned to Ukraine. I think back on the last week in Kyiv. We bring protocols, mannequins, 3D printed bones, artificial blood. We dispense tourniquets, bandages, ampules of a drug to control hemorrhage, drills to insert needles into bone marrow where there are no veins, shears to cut clothes to expose wounds. The participants on the course practice to make perfect. These are matters of life and death. A young woman who sold makeup online before the war is a combat medic. She thinks nothing of putting her life in danger to save the lives of others. The idealism of a young doctor from Odessa restores my lost faith. A young woman whose husband was killed on the front line a week ago says she is doing this for her husband, her children, her country. She says, "My husband is my hero." She hopes they will retrieve his body soon. Lost for words, I light a candle in St. Michael's golden-domed monastery for him, for her, for all of them, for all whom they have lost. The priest holds up an icon for the long queue to kiss, and I'm an altar boy back in Dublin in the 1960s. Outside St. Michael's, children play in sunshine on a tank, captured, rusting, covered in graffiti. Soon the train will stop. The border guard will give me back my passport, but I know I must return.
And now I'm delighted to welcome back Enda Coyle-Greene, who's going to share some of her own poems, having joined us earlier for our Behind the Storms chat. As I mentioned during the chat, her debut collection was called Snow Negatives. It won the Patrick Kavanagh Award in 2006 and was published by Daedalus Press. She followed that up with another collection called Map of the Last in 2013 and then Indigo Electric Baby in 2020. Widely published in anthologies both here in Ireland and abroad, she won a Catherine and Patrick Kavanagh Fellowship in 2022 and has an MA from the Seamus Heaney Centre for Poetry at Queen's University in Belfast. Please enjoy the company of Enda Coyle-Greene.
Thank you, Damien, for inviting me to record some poems for Eat the Storms. I begin with one from quite a while back now. It's a poem set in Spain and comes from my first collection, Snow Negatives, which was published by Daedalus Press in 2007. This is I Think of Water, and it's for Mary and James English. I think of water as a word shaped by a child. Its colour, quiet flowers that surround me, draped on fences. Overheard in someone else's garden, it is fluid-featured, speaking in a language I don't understand. I think of water as a bird above the roofs, a song spill into dust, a tongue of air where dusk breathes and the day becomes pared down to this, a star, a moon, an artery of concrete lain warm as blood between the houses. I think of water as the world cools on a dog's one note. At my feet, a polka-dotted cat absorbs the kindling crick and whir of crickets. A flick of night moths pass. Silently intent, they tease the single streetlight like a thirst. Life throws many things at us, often at the same time. My next poem concerns one of those moments. It comes from my second collection, Map of the Last, published by Daedalus Press in 2013. It's called Dolphin, and it's for Sheena Marr, friend in the West. Until then, you'd believed in your mirror, its tepid rendering of body, face, shape, slurred by a lapse of muscle behind retina, perhaps. You'd had all that time to get used to what it told while you hovered, a ghost in your own skin, afloat on an ocean of moods. But she sent you a map of a different sort, your friend in the West, with blue-inked waves, a blunt-ended pier, a hint of wind around that little boat's taut sail, a sun with a smile implied in its halo of spiked rays. Her house marked with an X. Before a word not anywhere in your doctor's voice arrives with the phone's unknowing tone to take you quietly. You're scanning the wall for a simple confirmation of yellow. Daffodil? Custard? You notice how it stays the same shade chosen from a chart. You find your mind ask, but what else is there besides the heart? Later, on the phone again, you were trying to explain why you won't make it to the West next week, when she begins to spin a story about swimming off White Strand. How the surfer's sea had opened to show teeth, huge, she says, a huge, sleek grey, then a word you've never heard her use before, or since, to describe her fright in such a presence. And you're laughing, 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 for the first, the only time that long weekend, as if your life depended on it. This next poem is the title poem from my most recent collection, which came out from Daedalus Press in 2020. And it concerns itself with a time when to find good music was a good deal harder than it is now. And the music in question would be the blues, in particular the great Robert Johnson. This is Indigo, Electric Baby. The signal slips through static, but I know he's blue, that Far Gurram on the radio. One word wrong in the Irish tongue conflates an alias the devil might have sweltered under back in days before religion gripped. He's playing music with a curious plural. And though I'm 13, 14 maybe, tuned to cerulean, cyan, cobalt, navy, manganese, indigo, electric, baby, colours I could touch with a brush slurred by water, or feed to a needle through its always open eye. I know blue can be black as the dust-cut deal, sealed by dying daylight in his song. I know blue is a mood no one chooses, that it's composed of bass rise, treble fall. I know too that what you name the shade won't matter. It will always call. Working in a particular poetic form can be a bit of a challenge,
but an interesting one insofar as it can take a poem away from whatever intentions you might have had for it, which is always a good thing, I think. This poem is also from Indigo Electric Baby, and it's called The Weather on the Streets. I deluded myself I wouldn't get wet as the sky flew slack with rainseed. A busker sang of love, love, and yet more love being all a body needs. As the sky flew slack with rainseed. I went to buy a tidy black umbrella, more love being all a body needs. The singer singing a cappella, I went to buy a tidy black umbrella, lying in my head with the refrain. The singer sang it a cappella. I stumbled in my heels in drains, lying in my head with the refrain, through hailstones melting big as hearts. I stumbled in my heels in drains. I told myself it couldn't start. Through hailstones melting big as hearts, a busker sang of love, love, and yet I told myself it couldn't start. I deluded myself I wouldn't get wet.
And of course that means the last guest on the show today is the second guest who joined me for our Behind the Storms chat, Ceaití ní Bheildiúin. Originally from nearby me in Rush here in County Dublin, she now lives in West Kerry. She's had volumes of poetry published, the latest of which was Ogam Ceaití, published by Cushcame, and it won the Michael Harnett Prize in 2021 and the Oireachtas Prize for Best Volume of Poetry in the Irish Language in 2018. Her most recent collection is called Waiting in the Wings. She is a mentor to emerging Irish language poets and facilitates creative writing workshops as well as poetry workshops through Irish in Dingle in County Kerry. Today, reading poems in both Irish agus Oscailga, this is Ceaití ní Bheildiúin.
Thank you, Damien. Delighted to get the invitation to be on your podcast. I'll read 3 original Irish poems and each will have an English translation. Thank you. First one is Frog, translation by Gabriel Rosenstock. Frog. Frog a machnamh mé a hían gan chorí a sú focail ó hlóthach trí mo chrican taní. Guim hicet na Égypte, bandían a bhrog, bandían a man chawra, dónta mo chuid a bháin a cheola slán in a mád beag póir an sail. Frog. A meditating frog am I, sitting silently, sucking syllables muddily through paper-thin skin. I pray to Heket of Egypt, goddess of frogs, goddess of midwives, help them to float these slimy verses in their tiny paper boat. And the next poem I'll read for you is called Gléach na Cailí. The translation, The Cailleach Calls, is by Paddy Bush. Gléach na Cailí. Si an uin féini an roi a rébe ceanna tí, a gís gán gheata críana,
gléacha nuas san chimney. Si ma agla I gullan gwaine a búla isteach chum a nocht gan chinne, fest na híá lurgaice is I gléasta mar chara lehlum. Crán si mé go dtí an láchan nuair a hetan si deara glasa. Scuile mach mé in a díg, amach ó bhreidenas mo cricin, ó mo chligan íran, nó go bhfuil fiantas onam a hauntíon an timmel, an tanathe, an tahrú. Tá smúsach a smúr híle mo kná, a gúsíon eisint na hoige I mo bheo. A churin dere le stolpacht an gírig, a bhúsglíon mo rusk rín géir. The kayak calls. She knows her time, the wind, buffeting down the roof, squealing through an old gate, crying in the chimney. She is my fear embodied, calling into me tonight unexpectedly, seeking company for the evening in the guise of a sort of friend. She torments me until daybreak when she's gone like a thunderbolt. Let me away after her, away from my confining skin, from my iron-bound head, because there is a wildness in me that craves the margin, the tempest, the transformation. There is sap coursing through my bones that rejuvenates the core of my being, that proclaims an end to the sclerosis of winter, that again edges my vision. And the third poem is Turlingt Bisha, Tailspin, and again the translation is by Paddy Bush. Turlingt Bisha. Gach sa léirú, neamh léir. Gach cinteacht, neamh cinte. Gach fragra gan slíosteach ann gan teoran in a hímpel. Telgathe I bhutharaga amach as Turlingt Bisha as megabiticus orna móracha, lapadálam frithe tislacha trí airsingacht bhug bháin, haar stúmacht an chnic, haar bhulda bhlianta, nóir raibh páilta riomh ag a crown jalgach an chréibh scuilte. Halamh nach seasach ein vaccínú I gcuine a thuirsaíochta féin. Útmálaige a géige go múlann siad le stair is le réamh stair I gló cloch, ruchtaí a halóiríonn fós fuitin de chuire. Ceadig dom síonsa is curran ceomhrán a dheangnú teann a nuas ar a mina clogad. Lig do bhiotas neamh oclacha na háite mo chluasa a phluacha. Laudam tosta, saolacha mo chosán in a munahar chódihin leis an gio a chalúr an Rome. Dédan an chosán a lanúint. Gach chosán, go dtí a gabhal, a imel, a scórnach, a bhín, aig go dtí loch nó amach sna firmamentí fallúin. Ligdam an bhrin ama fúm a á, gan isagam an chórtha a leanhead. Fill orm nuair a bheith mo híansa sailtethe ag a né drá gan lón. Is mé olav, beidir an sin, laurtlaat, fé cad in anam chrim, a scúb an subme. Tailspin. Every clarification obscured, every certitude uncertain, every answer sealed tight without parameters. Immersed in fog as I spiral downwards from our megabit tomorrows, I pad on uncertain feet through a soft white expanse over the wisdom of the mountain, over the heaped years not yet punctured by a barbed communications tree on ground that would not endure any inoculation against its own agelessness. My limbs falter until they encounter history and prehistory shaped in stone, forms that still offer shelter for sheep. Let me sit here and draw on a horn of mist, tightening it into a helmet. Allow the unspoken myths of the surroundings to overwhelm my ears. Allow me to be silent, images along my path murmur as fleetingly as the mist that fades before me. I could choose to follow the path, each path, to its fork, its end, its throat, its flank, onwards to a lake or out, floating into the firmament. Let me take soundings below me in the womb of time, not knowing the sign I will follow. Return to me when my senses have been illuminated by 9 days fasting, and I am ready, by then perhaps, to speak with you of what, in the name of all gods, brought me to this place. Thank you. Gurv Mila Maige Verfad.
Now, just before we go today, I'm going to leave you with one of my own poems. It would be rude not to leave you with a poem from the new collection. So this is from Back From Away, which was just published by Tourist Press. Thank you again to Liz McSkeen for publishing this. Just before I begin, this poem is set in South Korea on the island of Jeju, and it is actually set in an empty swimming pool. Even though it's set in Korea, there are a few French words in it. The first one being piscine, which means swimming pool. The second one is sans l'eau, without water. Sans rêve, without dreams. Et on ferme les yeux, and we close our eyes, and one closes one's eyes. So this poem is called Illusion Swims Over an Empty Pool. Feet swing above a blue tiled wall of a piscine sans l'eau, as if the world has cried up all the water on the planet. I rest my head on your shoulder, and you lean in to my support, as if we were both armbands to each other. Somewhere behind a day I made into a memory. In my mind you fake swim in that pool of dried tile, cracked sunshine, and our laughter reverberates between the stain at the bottom and the gulls flying overhead. Encircling sways in case we chose to be the bait for their beak. Behind us, a taxi rides away, and we are left to decipher how life drowns in a place sans rêve. Feet swing above a blue tiled wall of a piscine sans l'eau, et on ferme les yeux, to lean in to that which isn't really there. And just like that, we have reached the end of another episode of Eat the Storms, the poetry podcast. Thank you all so much, you the listeners, for tuning in on platforms like Spotify, Apple, Google, Breaker, Podbean, Player FM, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castbox, Podcast Addicts and iTunes. For details on all of my exceptional guests, you can head on over to the website www.eatthestorms.com. Click on the podcast section called Listen to the Podcast, and there you will find a blog post for every episode. This was episode 14, season 8, and in that blog post you will find bios, photos and social media handles so you can find, follow and be fans of all of my guests. And they have been Ceaití ní Bheildiúin, Enda Coyle-Greene, Chris Fitzpatrick, David Kelleher, Julian Matthews and Sarah Wallis. Now, while you're over at the podcast, of course, you can also check out all the details about The Storms, our journal of poetry, prose and visual arts. You can pick up a copy of one of our first 3 issues, and I'm very excited to say that we will be opening submissions later on this summer for issue 4. We are currently being supported by UNESCO, the Dublin City of Literature, and there will be a very special theme this year, so keep your eyes open on our website and also on all our social media platforms like Instagram, X and Facebook. And that's all from us for this week. I will be back with you, of course, again next week. Same time, perhaps a different platform. That's all for you to decide. But until then, make sure you have a brolly for the rain, some protection for the sun, antihistamines for the mosquitoes, and never be far from a sweet treat. My name has been Damien B. Donnelly. This has been Eat the Storms. And until next time, make sure that you stay